H1, Part 1. The Cradle of Stars was the largest neutral station in the known galaxy. It floated between three star systems like a silver city in the dark, and today it was full. Over 40 species had sent their best diplomats, generals, and royals for the annual Galactic Summit. The hallways buzzed with dozens of languages. Strange creatures walked side by side, some with 4 legs, some with none. Some who floated in gravity harnesses because they came from worlds where the air was thicker than water. Humanity had been part of the galactic community for only 40 years. In a galaxy where some civilizations were older than Earth's sun, that made humans little more than children. Most species treated them that way, with a mix of polite curiosity and quiet dismissal. Humans were small, fragile, and short-lived. They had no claws, no venom, no natural armor or bioelectric fields. Their only real achievement, in the eyes of the galaxy, was stumbling upon faster-than-light travel almost by accident. Nobody expected much from them. Nobody ever did. Princess Virat Selen of the Kalori Dominion expected even less. She stood 7 feet tall, with silver skin that caught the station's light like polished metal. Her eyes were pale violet, sharp and predatory, and her body moved with the kind of fluid grace that only came from a species built to hunt. The Kalori were apex predators. They had been at the top of their food chain for 100,000 years, and they had carried that attitude into the stars. They conquered, they dominated, and when they grew bored between conquests, they fought for sport. Virath had made a personal hobby of it. At every summit, every gathering, every diplomatic function, she would find a representative of a weaker species and issue a formal challenge, a Kalori rite of confrontation. It was an old tradition, supposedly meant to test the worth of potential allies. In practice, it was entertainment. She would humiliate her opponent in front of the galactic audience, remind everyone of Kalori's superiority, and return home with another story to tell at court. She had beaten Rillian scholars. She had broken Thasian warriors. She had made a Gorvan diplomat cry in front of his own delegation. And she had enjoyed every moment of it. Today, she wanted something new, something easy and amusing. She wanted a human. Her attendants had done a quick scan of the human delegation. There were only 12 of them. A small group led by Ambassador Claire Dunham, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who carried herself with quiet authority. But Virath was not interested in the ambassador, someone who would fold quickly and make the defeat look effortless. She found him in the observation lounge on Deck 7. He sat alone at a corner table near the wide viewport, where the stars stretched out in every direction like scattered diamonds. He was drinking coffee from a plain white cup and reading something on a small datapad. He was a man in his mid-40s, with short brown hair that was going gray at the sides, a square jaw, and hands that were rough and scarred from years of work. He wore a simple dark uniform with no medals, no ribbons, no decoration of any kind. The small name tag on his chest read, Lieutenant Commander Sam Beckett, Terran Naval Attaché. He looked like the most unremarkable man in the galaxy. Virath smiled. She crossed the lounge with her entourage behind her. 4 Kalori guards in ceremonial armor, each one nearly as tall as her, each one carrying a blade at their hip. The other aliens in the lounge saw them coming and moved aside. Conversation stopped. Eyes turned. Sam did not look up from his datapad. Virath stopped in front of his table and waited. 3 seconds passed. 5. He still did not look up. "Human," she said. Her voice was deep and carried across the room like a bell. Sam turned a page on his datapad. "1 moment," he said, in a calm and unhurried voice. "I'm at a good part." A ripple of shock went through the lounge. The Kalori guards stiffened. One of them placed a hand on his blade. Virath's violet eyes narrowed, but a small smile played at the corner of her mouth. She was amused. Good. The more entertaining the prey, the better the show. Sam finished his page, set the datapad down, and looked up at her. His eyes were brown and steady, and there was something in them, not fear, not arrogance, but a kind of deep, settled patience. The eyes of a man who had seen enough that very little surprised him anymore. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I am Princess Virat Solen of the Kalori Dominion," she announced, loud enough for the entire lounge to hear. "I invoke the right of confrontation. I challenge you, human, to a trial of combat, endurance, and tactical ability in the station arena. 3 rounds, full audience. The rules of engagement will follow Kalori tradition." She tilted her head, and her silver hair fell across her shoulder like liquid metal. "If you refuse," she said, "your species delegation will bear the mark of cowardice before the entire summit. Your people will be shamed." The lounge was dead silent. Every alien in the room was watching. A Rillian diplomat at a nearby table set down his drink and leaned forward. A pair of Thasian traders exchanged a look that clearly said, "Poor human." Sam looked at the princess. He looked at the crowd of alien faces staring at him with pity and morbid curiosity. Then he picked up his coffee, took a slow sip, and set it back down. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. Virath laughed. It was a rich, full sound, and her guards laughed with her. "The human asks if I am sure," she said, looking around the room as if inviting everyone to share the joke. "Yes, little creature, I am quite sure." Sam nodded slowly. "All right then," he said, "I accept." He said it the way someone might accept an invitation to lunch, without drama, without bravado, without any change in his expression at all. He picked up his datapad and his coffee and stood. He was a full foot shorter than her, and next to the Kalori guards, he looked almost comically small. He walked toward the exit, then paused and turned back. "What time?" 2 hours, Virath said, still smiling with amusement. "That gives me time to finish my book." And he walked out. The lounge erupted in whispers. Wagers were placed within minutes. The odds were 200 to 1 against the human. A Gorvan merchant offered to bet his ship that the human would not last 30 seconds in the combat round. In a quiet corridor near the human delegation's quarters, Ambassador Claire Dunham caught up with Sam. She was a composed woman who rarely showed worry, but her jaw was tight and her voice was low. "Sam, you don't have to do this." He stopped walking and looked at her. For just a moment, something shifted behind his eyes, something old and heavy and very, very tired. But it passed quickly, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "She picked me for a reason she doesn't understand yet," he said. "I'll be fine, Claire." Claire studied his face for a long moment. Whatever she saw there made her shoulders relax, just slightly. She knew what was in his file. The file that was sealed behind 3 levels of Terran military clearance. The file that nobody at this summit had thought to read, because nobody cared enough about the quiet human attaché drinking coffee in the corner. "Just don't break anything important," she said. Sam smiled, a small, tired, genuine smile. "No promises." He walked away down the corridor, his footsteps quiet on the metal floor. Behind him, through the station's walls, he could hear the hum of 1,000 alien voices placing their bets and laughing about the foolish little human who had just signed his own humiliation. Sam finished his coffee and kept walking. He had been underestimated before. It usually worked out. H1, Part 2. The arena on the Cradle of Stars was built for spectacle. It sat deep in the belly of the station, a massive circular chamber with tiered seating for thousands and a holographic projection system that could display the action to every corner. The floor of the arena was an adaptive surface, capable of generating any terrain, any environment, any gravity condition the judges selected. It had hosted duels between species for over 300 years. Today, it was packed. Word of the challenge had spread through the station like fire. Every seat was filled. Aliens of every shape, color, and biology pressed together in the stands, their voices blending into a low roar that vibrated through the walls. Screens floated above the arena, displaying the names and images of the two contestants. On the left, Princess Vyrath Selen, Kaelori Royal, champion of the right, undefeated in 11 formal challenges. On the right, Lieutenant Perigo. Commander Sam Beckett, human, Terran naval attaché, no recorded combat honors. The crowd knew who they were there to see, and it was not the human. Vyrath entered first. She walked through the eastern gate in full Kaelori ceremonial battle armor, a suit of interlocking silver plates that moved with her body like a second skin. A curved blade hung at her hip. Her silver hair was pulled back, and her violet eyes burned with confidence and hunger. She raised one fist to the crowd, and the arena shook with their roar. She was beautiful and terrifying, and she knew it. Then the western gate opened, and Sam walked in. He wore standard Terran fatigues, plain dark fabric, no armor, no helmet, no visible weapons. His boots were scuffed, his hands were empty. He looked like a man who had wandered in from a supply closet and taken a wrong turn. The crowd went quiet, not with anticipation, but with something closer to confusion. A few species made sounds that roughly translated to nervous laughter. A Thasian in the front row turned to his companion and said, "Is this a joke?" Sam walked to the center of the arena and stood there, calm and still, his arms loose at his sides. He looked up at the massive space around him, at the thousands of alien faces staring down, and showed no reaction at all. He might have been standing in line for coffee. The head judge, an ancient Pelori with 6 eyes and a voice like dry wind, announced the first round. Unarmed combat. No weapons. No lethal force. The round would end when one contestant yielded, was rendered unable to continue, or when the judges called a stop. The adaptive floor shifted beneath them, generating a flat stone surface. Simple. Clean. Nowhere to hide. Vyrath drew her blade and handed it to an attendant. She rolled her shoulders, and the joints in her armor clicked softly. She was 7 feet of coiled muscle and predatory instinct, and she looked at Sam the way a hawk looks at a mouse. "I will try not to break you too quickly, little human," she said. The audience paid for a show. Sam said nothing. He shifted his weight slightly, settled his feet, and waited. The bell sounded. Vyrath moved first, and she moved fast, faster than anything her size had a right to move. She closed the distance in 2 strides, and threw a strike that could have cracked stone. It was a classic Kaelori opening. Overwhelming force, immediate dominance, designed to end the fight before it began. It had worked on every opponent she had ever faced. Her fist cut through empty air. Sam was not where he had been. He had moved, not far, not dramatically, just enough. A half step to the left, a slight turn of his torso. Her strike missed him by inches. She felt the wind of his movement, smelled the strange scent of human sweat and something like old leather. And then he was beside her, and his hand found her wrist, and he redirected her own momentum past him, like water flowing around a stone. She stumbled. Just 1 step. But it was 1 step more than she had stumbled in years. The crowd made a sound, a collective intake of breath from 1,000 different respiratory systems. Vyrath spun and attacked again, faster, harder, a combination of strikes that came from every angle, fists, elbows, a sweeping kick that could have taken his legs out from under him. She was a storm of silver muscle and fury, and she poured everything into breaking this small, soft creature who dared to stand in front of her. Sam moved through it like smoke. He did not match her speed. He could not. No human alive could move as fast as a Kaelori in full combat mode. But he did not need to. Every movement he made was precise, minimal. He never moved more than he had to. He dodged by inches, blocked with angles instead of force, and turned her power against her with a technique that was so clean, so practiced, that it looked almost lazy. He was reading her. Every twitch of her shoulder told him where the next strike would come. Every shift of her weight told him which direction she would move. He had spent a lifetime studying how bodies worked, how they telegraphed intent, how they committed to motion, how they created openings in the space between one attack and the next. He had learned this not from books, but from decades of fighting things that wanted to kill him. Vyrath landed a blow. It caught him in the ribs on his left side, a short, brutal punch that connected with a sound like a cracking branch. Sam grunted. Something inside him shifted and broke. 2 ribs, maybe 3. Pain bloomed through his torso like white fire, and for a moment his vision narrowed. Vyrath pressed forward, sensing blood, her eyes bright with triumph. Sam breathed. 1 breath, 2. He let the pain settle into him, acknowledged it, and then put it somewhere deep and quiet where it could wait. He had been hurt worse than this. He had been hurt so many times that pain had become just another signal, like hunger or fatigue. Something to note, something to manage, not something to fear. He kept moving, and now, as the minutes stretched on, something strange began to happen. Vyrath was still faster, still stronger, still more powerful in every measurable way. But she was getting frustrated. Her attacks were getting wider, less controlled. She was burning energy, massive amounts of it, throwing everything she had at a target that simply would not stay still, would not go down, would not give her the satisfaction of breaking. Sam was not trying to beat her with strength. He was letting her beat herself. Patient and calm, round after round of her assault, absorbing what he could not avoid, deflecting what he could, and always, always, watching for the opening. It came at the 11-minute mark. Vyrath threw a wide hook, overextended by just a fraction, and for 1 heartbeat her balance was wrong. Sam stepped inside her guard, caught her arm, turned his hip into her center of gravity, and took her to the ground with a throw that used every ounce of her own momentum. Before she could recover, he was behind her, his arms locked around her neck and her arm in a hold that bent the joint against its natural direction. It was a submission hold from a grappling style that was over 2,000 years old on Earth. The Kaelori had never seen anything like it. Vyrath thrashed, her incredible strength straining against the lock. But Sam had the leverage, and leverage did not care how strong you were. His voice was strained from the broken ribs, but steady. Vyrath snarled. She fought the hold for another 10 seconds, her muscles bunching and writhing under her silver skin. But the pressure on her joint was absolute, and every movement she made only tightened it. She slammed her free hand against the floor, the universal sign. She yielded. The arena was silent for 3 full seconds. Then a sound began. Not cheering, not booing, but a low murmur that spread through the crowd like a wave. Confusion, disbelief, and underneath it, something that might have been the first stirring of respect. Sam released the hold and stood up. He offered Vyrath his hand to help her rise. She slapped it away and got to her feet on her own, her violet eyes burning. "This means nothing," she said, her voice tight. "The next rounds will break you." Sam nodded. Maybe. Then he walked to the waiting area, sat down on a metal bench, and began wrapping his broken ribs with a strip of fabric he tore from his undershirt. His hands were steady. His face showed nothing. Aurelian diplomat in the upper stands leaned toward his colleague, his 4 eyes wide. "I looked him up," he said quietly. "His service record. It is," he paused, searching for the word, "extensive." His colleague glanced down at the small human on the bench, calmly tending to his own wounds, and felt something cold move through him. It was the feeling of realizing you have been looking at something very dangerous and mistaking it for something harmless. Down in the arena, Sam finished wrapping his ribs, picked up his datapad, and went back to his book. The second round was in 1 hour. The second round was survival. The judges announced the rules to the crowd, and the arena floor began to change. The flat stone surface cracked, shifted, and reformed. Temperature plummeted. Frost crawled across the ground like something alive. Within minutes, the entire arena had become a frozen wasteland, a vast field of snow and ice, jagged rock formations, and bitter wind that howled through artificial canyons. The environmental systems dropped the temperature to 40 degrees below zero and kept pushing it lower. Scattered across the terrain were limited supplies, a few pieces of raw material, some basic tools, scraps of fabric. Nothing generous, nothing easy. The simulated environment also contained predatory fauna, creatures designed by the arena systems to hunt, harass, and test the contestants. They were not real, but they could hurt. The pain was simulated too, but the body did not know the difference. Both contestants would be dropped at opposite ends of the wasteland. The goal was simple: survive 12 hours. Whoever was in better condition at the end, or whoever forced the other to yield, would win. If both survived, the judges would decide. Vyrath entered the frozen terrain through the eastern gate. She had removed her ceremonial armor and wore her Kalori environmental suit, a sleek silver garment that offered some protection, but was designed for temperate conditions, not extremes. The Kalori homeworld was a paradise. Warm oceans, gentle winds, abundant food. Her species had never needed to evolve for cold. They had conquered it instead, with technology and force, the same way they conquered everything. She looked out across the frozen landscape with narrowed eyes and set her jaw. She would endure this. She was Kalori. She would not lose to a human twice. Sam entered through the western gate in his fatigues. His ribs were still broken. The cold hit him like a wall, and he felt it immediately. The deep, bone-level ache that crept into the body when the temperature dropped past the point where clothing could help. He had felt this before, many times. In training exercises on Earth's northern wastelands, in the frozen mountains of colony worlds, in the unheated wreckage of a ship drifting through deep space with its power core dead. He did not waste time. Within the first 20 minutes, Sam had found a sheltered spot between two rock formations that blocked the worst of the wind. He gathered dry materials, scraps of dead plant matter, fibrous debris, thin sticks that the arena had seeded into the terrain. He arranged them with practiced hands, took 2 rough stones from the ground, and struck them together. It took him 4 tries. On the 5th, a spark caught, and within minutes he had a small fire burning in a ring of stones. The crowd in the stands watched with quiet fascination. Most of them had never seen a fire built by hand. Their species had moved past such things millions of years ago, or had never needed them at all. There was something strangely beautiful about it. This small, injured creature kneeling in the snow, coaxing flame from nothing with patience and skill. Sam did not stop at the fire. He built a shelter, not large, but insulated, using packed snow and rock slabs angled to trap heat and deflect wind. He sealed the gaps with ice and fabric scraps. He found a trickle of water running beneath a rock shelf, melted more with heated stones, and stored it in a hollow he carved from ice. He set simple traps along the paths where the simulated predators were likely to move, using bent sticks and loops of torn fabric. He did all of this with broken ribs. He did not slow down. He did not rest until the shelter was built, the fire was fed, and the perimeter was secured. Then he sat down, added another piece of fuel to the fire, and waited. On the other side of the wasteland, Vyrath was fighting. She had taken the approach her species always took. She used her strength, She tore rocks from the ground and stacked them into a crude wall. She ripped apart a fallen synthetic tree and built a frame. It was brute engineering, fast and powerful, and it produced something that looked like a shelter from the outside. But it was not insulated. The wind found every crack. The cold seeped through the gaps in the stone, and without fire, Vyrath had no knowledge of how to create flame from raw materials. The temperature inside was barely better than outside. Her environmental suit's heating elements burned through their charge within 3 hours and went dead. The cold began its work. Kalori biology was not built for this. Vyrath's silver skin, which had looked so beautiful in the warm light of the observation lounge, offered no insulation. Her muscles, so powerful and explosive in combat, burned energy at a tremendous rate and demanded fuel she did not have. Her body began to slow. Her fingers grew stiff. Her thoughts became heavy and thick, like trying to think through mud. By hour 6, she was shivering violently. By hour 8, the shivering had stopped, which was worse. Her body was giving up the fight to stay warm. She huddled against the stone wall of her failing shelter and stared at nothing, her violet eyes dimming. She was too proud to yield. She would rather freeze. Sam found her at hour 9. He had been tracking her since hour 4. Not to compete, not to watch her fail. He had been watching the environmental data on a small readout the arena provided to each contestant, and he had seen her temperature dropping. He knew what hypothermia looked like. He knew the stages. He knew what came after the shivering stopped. He had crossed a mile of frozen wasteland with broken ribs and wind cutting through his fatigues like knives to reach her. When he found her, she was curled against the stone wall, barely conscious. Her skin had gone from silver to a dull gray. Her breathing was shallow and slow. She looked up at him with unfocused eyes and tried to speak, but her jaw would not work. Sam knelt beside her. He could have left her. The rules allowed it. If she collapsed, he won automatically. It would have been the smart move, the strategic move, the move that any Kalori in his position would have made without hesitation. He picked her up and carried her back to his camp. It took him 40 minutes. She was heavy. Kalori were denser than humans, their muscle and bone built thicker, and his ribs screamed with every step. He carried her over rocks, through snowdrifts, against the wind, and he did not stop once. When he reached his shelter, he laid her near the fire, covered her with the insulating layers he had built for himself, and fed the flames until the heat was enough to push back the cold. He melted water and held it to her lips. He shared the small portion of food he had gathered from his traps. He sat beside her through the long hours, keeping the fire alive, keeping watch for the simulated predators, and slowly, she came back. Her color returned, her eyes cleared. She blinked, looked around at the shelter, the fire, the careful arrangement of everything Sam had built, and then she looked at him. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was rough and broken. He watched the sparks rise into the dark and disappear. "Because where I come from," he said quietly, "we learned a long time ago that the ones who survive aren't the strongest. They're the ones who refuse to let anyone else die on their watch." Vyrath stared at him. "That is weakness." "No," Sam said. "That's how we're still here." He told her then in simple words about what his species had been through. He told her about the ice ages, long centuries of freezing cold that covered their world, when humans had been small and weak and hunted by everything, and they had survived anyway. He told her about the wars, not with pride, but with the honesty of a man who knew exactly what his species was capable of, both good and terrible. He told her about plagues that killed millions, famines that starved whole continents, and every single time, humans picked themselves up and kept going. "We're not strong," he said. "Not like you. We break easy. We die young. But we don't quit. We've never quit. 10,000 years of everything the universe could throw at us, and we're still here. That's not because we're the best. It's because we're the most stubborn things that ever lived." Vyrath was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the wind howled, and the cold pressed against the walls of the shelter that this small broken man had built with his bare hands. "You could have won," she said finally. "You could have left me." "I could have," Sam agreed. "But then I wouldn't be what I am." The round ended at the 12-hour mark. The judges reviewed the data and prepared to declare Sam the winner. He stopped them. He told them to record it as a draw. The crowd did not know what to make of that. Vyrath did not either. She stood in the arena entrance, wrapped in a thermal blanket the medical team had given her, and watched Sam walk away with his broken ribs and his quiet face, and she felt something she had never felt before in her life. She did not have a word for it, not in Kaylori. The closest translation in a human language she did not yet speak would have been humility. Her attendants rushed to her side. "Your Highness, you should withdraw from the final round. There is no shame in—" "No," she said. Her voice was firm. Her eyes followed Sam until he disappeared around a corner. "I need to understand him." Up in the stands, the Rillian diplomat had pulled Sam's full service record. He was reading it on his datapad, with all 4 eyes wide open, and his hands were trembling. He passed the datapad to the diplomat sitting next to him without a word. Ambassador Claire Dunham sat in the human section, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes bright with tears she would not let fall. She had known Sam Beckett for 15 years. She had read his file. She had seen what he had done and what it had cost him, and she had watched him ask for a quiet posting as a naval attaché because he was tired of being a hero and just wanted to drink his coffee in peace. The galaxy was about to find out what she already knew. The final round was in 3 hours. The third and final round was Tactical Command. The arena had been reconfigured. The frozen wasteland was gone, replaced by a vast holographic projection system that filled the entire chamber with light. 2 command consoles stood on raised platforms on opposite sides of the arena floor, each surrounded by floating screens and control interfaces. Above them, the holographic display showed a 3-dimensional map of a simulated star system: planets, asteroid fields, moons, space stations, and shipping lanes, all rendered in crisp blue light that the entire audience could see. Each contestant would command a virtual fleet of warships. They would make decisions in real time: positioning, tactics, resource management, logistics, communications, electronic warfare. The simulation would respond to their orders with military-grade accuracy. Every ship in each fleet would behave according to real physics, real fuel consumption, real crew limitations. This was not a game. It was a war, compressed into hours. The judges announced the parameters. Both fleets were equal in size and capability. No advantages, no handicaps. The contest would be decided purely by who commanded better. Vyrath took her place at the Eastern Console with the calm confidence of someone who had trained for exactly this her entire life. And she had. Kaylori royalty were raised on fleet command the way human children were raised on language. Before she could walk, Vyrath had been watching tactical simulations. By the time she was 10, she could coordinate a battle group. By 20, she had commanded actual naval forces in border skirmishes that crushed 3 separate species' attempts at resistance. She was, by any objective measure, a brilliant tactical mind. The Kaylori doctrine of war was built on dominance, overwhelming force concentrated at the point of greatest impact. The hammer and the anvil. Strike hard, strike fast, and break the enemy before they could think. It had worked for centuries. It had built an empire. She deployed her fleet in the classic Kalori formation, a tight central battle group flanked by two fast-strike wings, designed to pin the enemy in place and then crush them from both sides. It was elegant, it was proven, it was devastating. Sam sat at the western console and studied the holographic display for a long time. He did not deploy immediately. The crowd murmured. The timer was running. Every second he waited was a second Vyrath used to advance her fleet into dominant positions. Then he gave his first order, and the crowd fell silent. He split his fleet, not into 2 groups, or 3, or even 4. He broke it into dozens of fragments, small clusters of ships scattered across the map, like seeds thrown into the wind. Some groups had only 3 ships, some had 1. They were spread across the star system in what looked like absolute chaos, with no clear formation, no center, no visible strategy. A Gorvan admiral in the stands made a sound of disgust. "He has lost his mind," he said to the person beside him. "You cannot fight a Kalori battle group with scattered fragments. He will be destroyed in detail." Vyrath saw the same thing. Her violet eyes swept across the display, and she smiled, the first real smile she had shown since the combat round. This was going to be easy. She ordered her fleet forward, her central battle group driving straight toward the largest cluster of human ships, her strike wings sweeping out to catch the fragments. Her hammer struck empty space. The cluster she had targeted was gone. The ships had scattered before her fleet arrived, slipping away in different directions, like a school of fish breaking apart in front of a predator. And as her battle group pushed forward into the space they had occupied, something happened on her flanks. 3 of Sam's fragments, 9 ships total, appeared behind her left strike wing and hit it from an angle she had not covered. They fired, destroyed 2 ships, and vanished back into the asteroid field before her wing could turn to respond. At the same time, on the other side of the map, a single ship from Sam's fleet slipped into range of her supply convoy and began broadcasting false signals on Kalori communication frequencies. Fake orders, fake distress calls, fake sensor readings that made her logistics ships think they were under attack from a direction where no enemy existed. Her supply line stuttered. Her left wing scrambled to regroup. And in the confusion, Sam's fragments moved again. Vyrath adapted. She was too good a commander not to. She pulled her fleet into a tighter formation, closed her sensor gaps, and pushed forward with greater caution. But Sam adapted faster. Every time she adjusted, he had already anticipated the adjustment. Every time she closed one gap, he opened 2 more. His fragments were everywhere and nowhere, appearing, striking, and disappearing in patterns that followed no doctrine she had ever studied, because it was not a doctrine she had ever studied. What Sam was running was not Kalori war theory. It was not Rillian defensive strategy, or Thasian attrition warfare, or any of the galactic combat philosophies that had been developed by species with overwhelming natural advantages. It was something uniquely, terrifyingly human. It was 10,000 years of humans fighting humans. Guerrilla warfare, asymmetric tactics, feints within feints, sacrificial units that drew the enemy into traps, communication disruption, psychological operations, the doctrine of the underdog, the philosophy developed by every outnumbered, outgunned, outmatched human force that had ever faced a superior enemy and found a way to win anyway. Sam had fought real wars using these principles. Not simulations, not exercises, real battles where real people died if he made the wrong call. And he had made the wrong call before. He carried those losses with him every day, in the quiet spaces behind his eyes. But he had learned from every single one, and what he had learned was written in the movement of his fleet, like poetry written in fire. Vyrath fought back with everything she had. She was brilliant. She was adaptable. She pulled maneuvers that would have crushed any conventional opponent. But Sam was not conventional. He was water flowing around stone, fire finding every crack, wind that could not be caught or held or pinned down. In the second hour, he destroyed her supply chain entirely. Her fleet began running out of fuel and ammunition. In the third hour, he isolated her strike wings from her central group and picked them apart in a series of coordinated ambushes that came from 6 directions at once. In the fourth hour, with her fleet reduced to a third of its original strength, and her command ship surrounded by a closing net of small, fast, relentless human vessels, Vyrath stared at her console and realized something that hit her harder than any physical blow she had ever received. She had not just lost. She had been outthought, outmaneuvered, and outfought at every level by a species the galaxy considered children. The simulation ended, the holographic display faded, and for a long, terrible moment, there was no sound at all. Then the Rylian diplomat stood. He was an older man, if you could call a Rylian a man, with 4 eyes set in a narrow face, and a voice that carried the weight of someone who had spent decades in service to his people. He had been reading Sam's service record for hours. He had verified it through 3 independent databases. And now he spoke, not to his colleagues, not to his delegation, but to the entire arena. "I have read this man's record," he said, and his voice cut through the silence like a blade. His full record, the one sealed behind Terran military clearance. The crowd turned to look at him. "His name is Samuel James Beckett. He holds the Terran Silver Star with 3 clusters, the highest decoration for valor that humans award. He was given his first cluster at the age of 26 for actions during the evacuation of Colony Marin, where he held a bridge alone for 4 hours to allow 300 civilians to reach the transport ships." The Rylian paused and took a breath. He received his second cluster for the Battle of the Kessler Corridor, where he commanded a destroyer group against a pirate fleet 3 times his size, and won. He received his third. The Rylian's voice wavered, just slightly. He received his third for the defense of Outpost Kira during the Vorax incursion. A murmur ran through the crowd. Even species who knew little about human affairs had heard of the Vorax incursion, a sudden devastating attack by a hostile species that had caught the galactic community off guard. At Outpost Kira, 46 humans held a defensive position for 19 days against a force of 8,000 Vorax soldiers. They had no reinforcements. They had limited ammunition. They had no way out. The Rylian looked down at Sam, who was sitting very still at his command console, his face showing nothing. 9 survived. This man was their commander. The arena was absolutely silent. "The humans," the Rylian said, and now there was something in his voice that sounded almost like awe, "did not send a diplomat to this summit. They sent a living legend, and they dressed him in a plain uniform and sat him in a corner with a cup of coffee and let us believe he was nobody." The silence held for 5 seconds, 10, 15. Then a sound began in the stands. Not cheering, not applause, but something deeper and older. A low rumble of recognition that moved from species to species, row by row, as the reality of what they had witnessed settled into them like stone, settling into deep water. They were not just reassessing the man in the arena. They were reassessing the species that had made him. Sam stood up from his console. He did not look at the crowd. He did not acknowledge the Rylian's words. He walked across the arena floor to where Vyrath sat at her console, still staring at the remnants of her shattered fleet on the dying holographic display. He stopped in front of her and held out his hand. "Good fight," he said. Vyrath looked at his hand. She looked at his face, this ordinary, tired, impossible face. She looked at the hand that had built a fire from nothing, that had carried her through a frozen wasteland, that had dismantled her fleet with the quiet precision of a man who had been doing this longer than she had been alive. For the first time in her life, Princess Virat Selen of the Kalori Dominion did not know what to do. In the stands, Ambassador Claire Dunham wiped her eyes and turned to the young human aide sitting next to her. "He hates this," she said softly. "He volunteered for the attaché posting because he wanted something quiet. He just wanted to read his book." The aide looked down at the arena, at the small human standing with his hand extended, and his broken ribs and his absolute unshakable calm, and shook his head in wonder. "But he's going to be really annoyed about the attention, isn't he?" the aide said. Claire almost laughed. "You have no idea." Part 5. The days that followed the challenge changed the shape of the summit. It started slowly, the way big changes often do. Not with dramatic announcements or sudden shifts, but with small things. A Thasian diplomat who had ignored the human delegation for 3 days approached Claire Dunham at breakfast and asked to sit with her. A Gorvan trade minister who had laughed at the odds against Sam before the fight now sent a formal request for a bilateral economic meeting. The Pelori, who had not spoken directly to a human in the entire 40 years since first contact, invited the Terran delegation to a private dinner. The galaxy was paying attention. In the arena, they had seen something they could not explain away or dismiss. They had watched a physically inferior being outfight a Kalori warrior, outlast a frozen wasteland, and outthink one of the finest military minds in the Dominion. And then they had watched him refuse to let his enemy freeze to death. Call a round he won a draw, and walk away without a single word of boasting. That combination, the competence and the compassion, the strength and the gentleness, was something most of them had never encountered before. The galaxy understood power. It understood dominance and submission, predator and prey, strong and weak. What it did not understand was a species that could be all of those things at once, and choose, in every moment, which one to be. Virat found Sam 2 days after the challenge. He was exactly where she expected him to be, in the observation lounge on Deck 7, at the same corner table, with a fresh cup of coffee and his datapad. His ribs had been treated by the station medical team, though he had waited 6 hours before going to them, because he said he wanted to finish his chapter first. The medics had been horrified. Claire had not been surprised. Virat stood at his table. She was not wearing armor. She was not accompanied by guards. She wore a simple Kalori robe, and her silver hair hung loose around her shoulders. And she looked, for the first time since Sam had seen her, like a person instead of a weapon. "May I sit?" she asked. Sam looked up. There was no surprise on his face, no wariness, no triumph. He just gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The stars drifted past the viewport in their slow, eternal rotation, and the hum of the station filled the quiet between them. "I have been thinking," Virat said finally, "about what happened in the survival round, about what you said." Sam waited. "I have been trying to understand your species," she continued. "I have read your history since the challenge, all of it that I could find. Your wars, your disasters, your struggles. You have nearly destroyed yourselves many times." "Yes," Sam said simply. "And yet you did not." "No. How?" She leaned forward, and there was nothing arrogant in her voice now, nothing predatory, just genuine, bewildered curiosity. "How does a species so fragile, so short-lived, so physically unremarkable produce someone like you? How does a world with no natural advantages create beings who can do what you did in that arena?" Sam was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee cup slowly between his rough hands and looked out at the stars. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, and I need you to really hear it, because it's the part everyone gets wrong." Vyrath waited. "I'm not special," he said. She opened her mouth to argue, but he held up a hand. "I mean it. I'm not. I'm not the fastest or the strongest or the smartest human alive. I'm not even close. What I am is experienced. I've been through a lot, and I'm still standing, and people find that impressive because they can see it. But here's the thing. Go to any human world, any colony, any ship, any station where humans live and work, and you'll find people like me. Not soldiers, not warriors, just people." He took a sip of his coffee. "There's a woman on the colony world of Haven who ran a school during the Vorax attacks. Power was out. Half the buildings were destroyed. She kept 50 children alive for 3 weeks by moving them through the wreckage at night and teaching them lessons during the day so they wouldn't be afraid. She's a school teacher. She has no military training. She just decided those kids were going to live, and they did." Vyrath listened. "There's a doctor on Luna Station named Kevin Park, who walked into a radiation zone during a reactor breach to pull out 6 engineers who were trapped behind a collapsed wall. He knew exactly what the radiation would do to him. He went in anyway. Lost his left hand. Saved all 6. He went back to work 2 months later with a prosthetic, and never once called himself a hero." Sam set down his cup. "There's a kid. She couldn't have been more than 14, on the transport ship Wanderer. Pirates boarded them near the Kessler corridor. The adults panicked. This girl grabbed a fire extinguisher, hit the first pirate through the airlock door, and barricaded the passenger compartment for an hour, until the Navy arrived. When they asked her why she did it, she said, because someone had to." He looked at Vyrath, and his brown eyes were steady and warm and very, very serious. "That's humanity, Your Highness. That's what we are. Not me, not my record, not the things I did at Outpost Kira. All of us, every single one. We're soft, and we break easy, and we live such short lives that most of the galaxy doesn't even bother learning our names. But when things go wrong, when the cold comes, when the fire starts, when the walls close in, something in us wakes up and says no. Not today. Not while I'm standing." He smiled, that small, tired, genuine smile that Claire Dunham knew so well. "I'm not a legend. I'm just a human. We're all like this. We just don't advertise it." Vyrath sat very still for a long time. Her violet eyes shone with something that might have been tears, though Kalori physiology made it hard to tell. When she finally moved, she did something that no one in the observation lounge expected. She stood, placed one hand over her heart, and bowed. Not in submission, not in defeat, in recognition, in respect. It was a gesture so old in Kalori culture that most living Kalori had only read about it in historical texts. The bow of the warrior who meets an equal. The acknowledgement that the being before them has earned a place in the story of the universe. No Kalori royal had ever given it to a non-Kalori. In the entire recorded history of the Dominion, it had never happened. Until now. Sam looked up at her with quiet surprise. Then he nodded, just once, and said, "Thank you." She held the bow for 3 seconds, then straightened. "I will be speaking with my father," she said. "The Emperor. I will be recommending a formal alliance with Earth." Sam raised his eyebrows. "That's a big step." "It is the correct step," she said. "I came to this summit to prove that my species was superior to all others. I found a species worth standing beside." She turned and walked away, her silver robe catching the light of the stars through the viewport. The aliens in the lounge who had witnessed the exchange sat in stunned silence, then began talking in urgent, excited whispers that would ripple outward through the station, and eventually through the galaxy. The political fallout unfolded over the following days like a flower opening. The Kalori delegation, once aloof and dismissive, began engaging with the human team in earnest. Claire Dunham, who had prepared for a summit of polite invisibility, suddenly found herself at the center of half a dozen alliance negotiations. The Rillians proposed a joint scientific exchange. The Thasians offered trade agreements. Even the Pelori, ancient and cautious and slow to change, signaled their interest in closer relations. The balance of power at the summit did not shift through threats or displays of force. It shifted because a quiet man with broken ribs and a cup of coffee had shown the galaxy what humanity truly was. Not what they could destroy, but what they could endure, what they could build, and what they would sacrifice for someone who, by all rights, was their enemy. On the last evening of the summit, Sam was back in the observation lounge. His ribs were mostly healed. His datapad was open. His coffee was fresh. The stars rolled past the viewport in their endless, patient way, and the station hummed around him like a living thing. Claire Dunham sat down across from him. She looked tired but happy, the look of a diplomat who had just had the most productive week of her career. "You know you just changed the course of galactic diplomacy," she said. Sam turned a page on his datapad. "I just had coffee and got into a fight," he said. "Felt like a Tuesday." Claire laughed, a real full laugh that turned heads nearby. She shook her head and leaned back in her chair. "The Kaylori Emperor is reportedly reading the alliance proposal tonight. The Rillians want to name a cultural exchange program after you, and the Gorvan merchant who bet his ship against you is apparently very upset." "He should be," Sam said mildly. "I hope whoever won the bet takes care of that ship." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars. Somewhere on the station, a Kaylori princess was writing a letter to her father, carefully choosing the words that would reshape the relationship between two civilizations. Somewhere else, a Rillian diplomat was telling his colleagues that the humans were not what anyone thought they were, and that the galaxy would be wise to pay attention. And in dozens of meeting rooms and private quarters and dining halls across the cradle of stars, representatives of 40 species were talking about a species they had overlooked for 40 years, and realizing, with varying degrees of wonder and unease, that they had made a very significant mistake. Claire glanced at Sam. "So what are you going to do now? You know they won't let you go back to being invisible after this." Sam sipped his coffee and considered the question with the same careful patience he brought to everything. "I figure I'll finish my book," he said. "Then maybe get some sleep. After that, I don't know. Maybe I'll see if the station has a decent breakfast place." Claire smiled. "The galaxy just changed, Sam." He looked at her, and for a moment the weariness in his eyes lifted, and she saw the man underneath, the man who had held a bridge alone at 26, who had commanded a last stand at Outpost Kira, who had carried an alien princess through a frozen wasteland because letting her die was simply not something he was capable of doing. "The galaxy's always changing," he said. "That's what it does. We just keep showing up." He went back to his book. Claire went back to the stars, and in the quiet hum of the cradle of stars, surrounded by the light of a billion suns and the slow turning of civilizations older than his species' entire history, one ordinary, extraordinary human drank his coffee and turned the page, and the galaxy, just a little, turned with him towards something better.